Welcome to our September BYOB book chat. There are 4 of us librarians here tonight who are super excited to tell you about the books that we've been reading recently. I will introduce them really quick. There's Amy, Brenna, that's me, Katie, and Tom. And we're all going to take turns and tell you about what we've been reading that we've enjoyed that we think you might like as well. So I will get us started with our first book. It is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. And this is just the perfect spooky fall Halloween read kind of book. So our main character is Noemi, and she lives in Mexico City in the 1950s, and she's kind of a socialite. She has the pretty dresses, and she's going to all these parties and just having a fun experience. And then she gets a letter from her cousin Catalina, and Catalina has just married this kind of strange Englishman who's taken her off to live in this isolated estate in the mountains out in Mexico. And this letter that she gets is kind of concerning. Catalina doesn't sound like she's doing really well. So Noemi goes out there to check it out, and right away things are kind of weird. Catalina's husband's family is very strange. They have all these rules. They keep talking about eugenics. They're just not nice to her. And the house is old and creepy and covered in mold. So right away, something is not right. And you'll find out what it is, but I won't spoil it for you. So this book is a really cool combination of fantasy, horror, it's literary fiction. It's very well written. There's a lot of suspense as well. I read this last week when the temperature turned, so it was kind of chilly and dark and overcast, and I kind of just curled up in bed with a nice spooky book. It was so much fun. So that is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia.
So this is one that I read. It's called Well Met by Jen DeLuca, and this is a romance, contemporary romance. And it's about a woman named Emily who moves to a small town in Maryland for the summer to help her sister recover from an car accident that she was in. And Emily's niece wants to sign up for the Renaissance Fair, and she's been dreaming of participating in the Renaissance Fair, but Emily's niece can only participate if Emily also participates as kind of like a parent guardian. And Emily's one hang up with that is that there's a really mean teacher there named Simon who likes to tell her that she's doing everything wrong, and he's very serious, and they just don't get along. But Emily, whether or not she wants to, commits to the Renaissance Fair, and she actually has a really good time, and she makes some good friends. And Emily is a bar wench, and Simon is a pirate. And something about the Renaissance Fair just gets to them, and they become very flirty, and Simon becomes a very different person. And in the end, they both have some things that they have to work through, and they have there's some turmoil in their relationship because Emily doesn't really know if she wants to stay in Maryland for a long time or if she wants to, move on. But she finds that Simon is really compelling, and more compelling the more that she gets to know him. And this is a really great storyline, and it has great banter. I'm a sucker for great banter, as you'll see in the coming books. And what I liked about this one was that there were really great character arcs for both male and female characters. It wasn't just about, their romance and their romance developing, but it was about them as separate people kind of learning about themselves too. And, it's super cute because it's set at the Renaissance Fair. So if you like the Renaissance Fairs or, pirates or romance, you should check this one out.
Okay, this is The Sinking of the Titanic, a juvenile graphic novel by Matt Doden and illustrated by Charles Barnett III and Phil Miller. We have such a fascination with the sinking of this ship. It's a terrible tragedy that we can't get enough of. You can read this in 15 minutes and get a whole lot of information. Throughout the trip, a radio operator sat in the wireless room. He sent and received messages for the ship's passengers. He also received messages from other ships reporting weather conditions. A few of the iceberg warnings reached Captain Smith, some did not. The operator was too busy with other messages. What? I didn't know that. And did you know first-class passengers paid almost $4,400 for a first-class ticket? Translating that to how much that would cost today, can you just guess how much that would cost?
$25,000.
$117,000.
Oh my God.
I know. I double checked this website. It's great. You put in the dollar amount of money from what year to how much it would translate to today.
Wow.
I can't. So that was astronomical. Who, the amount of the families that purchased first class tickets. Wow. So although short, this is very informative. And what you can't get out of reading, like from a nonfiction book out of the Titanic, I mean, like, look at that crack. I mean, that's the ship. I know, but it's really cool if you like to teach kids. I don't know, just a piece of history, and it's short and sweet.
All right, so the book that I read was Crossing to Safety by Wallace Stegner. This is kind of an oldie. It was written in 1987. It was Stegner's last book. He's really renowned for having won both a Pulitzer and for Angle of Repose, which is probably maybe his most famous book, and a National Book Award for The Spectator Bird. And he's called the Dean of Western Writers, which I found very interesting because there is absolutely nothing Western about his last book. In fact, it's very steeped in the Midwest. That's where it starts out with two couples. It's Depression era, 1937, and it's a book kind of steeped in the Midwest, in Madison, Wisconsin, and in academia, where these couples meet. Larry and Sally Morgan are kind of the poor, up-and-coming, struggling, trying to make ends meet, just got their first job at the university. Larry is an up-and-coming and really brilliant writer. And then Charity and Sid Lang, who are sort of East Coast money. Charity is a driven individual, really pushing Sid to publish and try to rise through academia. So they're kind of an unlikely set of couples. All social life in Madison revolves around Charity and Sid and the gatherings they have at their house. But they really take to the Morgans and take them under their wing, and they become fast friends. So it's a great exploration of their kind of rises and falls and the endurance of their 35-year friendship. The book is looking back. So the narrator kind of starts out in 1972 and then looks back at the course of their friendship through the 35 years because something big is happening in this moment in 72. So they have all gathered. It's got a really strong sense of place, both in Wisconsin, and then instead of shifting west, all of the action in the book shifts east to a lake in Vermont, which really drew me in because I have a lot of history in Vermont. And it turns out that Stegner, even though he was known for his time in the West, he owned a place in a small town called Greensboro, Vermont. I was going to show you. I actually went there this summer. This is the lake that a lot of the action later in the book is. Battelle Pond is actually this Caspian lake in Greensboro, Vermont. But there's a lot about the expectations for the sexes at different points in their history. So that this book spans. Charity is a very driven kind of a person. It's a book about marriage and friendship, how it endures both kind of the lovable and generous and aggravating traits in personalities. And you might argue a little bit about the characters. Are they selfish, or are they arrogant, or are they generous or loving or harsh or manipulative or domineering? We had this conversation in my book discussion. Are they brilliant or meek? Turns out the answer is probably all of the above. So it's a lot about how this combination binds them together as couples through this 35-year friendship, and how they, offer each other some grace and some forgiveness, and also it explains some of the deep misunderstandings that come up in the book and that they're sort of looking back on when they get to this event in 1972. It was beautifully, beautifully written. If you like literary fiction, you will have a very strong sense of both the place and the personalities just with Stegner's writing. He's really a beautiful writer. I've never read anything else of his Western books, but I feel like doing that now, although I love the Vermont angle.
Okay, next up is What You Wish For by Catherine Center. So this is a super fun, light contemporary fiction / romance. The main character is Samantha, and she's a school librarian in Galveston, Texas, just kind of enjoying her life. She loves working with kids. And then at the beginning of the school year, they get a new principal, and his name is Duncan. And he was actually the reason that she left her last job, because she was just crazy about him and he did not notice her at all. And she was so heartbroken that she moved away and found a new job. But he's changed a lot since she knew him last. He used to be really fun and carefree, and now he's all about rules, and he wants to paint the school gray and make everyone wear uniforms and cancel all the field trips. And all the teachers are kind of in a tizzy because he's just changing everything too fast. So they start to develop kind of a romance, but they each have their own kind of hang-ups that they work through. If you're a fan of quirky characters, love stories, happy endings, you'll want to check this one out. It reminded me a lot of Evie Drake Starts Over by Linda Holmes, if you like that one, or if you're just a fan of romance and contemporary fiction and you want something kind of light and happy. So that is What You Wish For by Catherine Center.
Brenna, I know we've already talked about this, but I really like most of Catherine Center's things, so I'm excited to add that to my list.
Yeah, I read all of her books. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, it's realistic fiction that doesn't make you feel dumb, which I appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a little more substance to it. Now, this is Prairie Lotus by Linda Sue Park. This is about a girl named Hannah, and Hannah is relocating to a small town in the middle of America in 1880, 1800s. And she is half Asian, and she needs to adjust to life in a small town, but also life in a small town that has prejudices against Asians. And even more so, the town needs to adjust to Hannah because it's just Hannah and her father because her mother has passed away. But Hannah and her father are really optimistic, and they really try hard to stay true to themselves, but also trying to work with the town and make friends. And what's special about Hannah is she and her father have a very successful dressmaking shop, and Hannah is really known for making beautiful dresses. And the townspeople see this and really like that Hannah and her father want to make such a great contribution to their town and making their town successful. And so eventually Hannah and her father really kind of find their place in this town. And I would recommend this to fans of Little House on the Prairie, or anyone who, likes sewing and crafting. This would be a great book for them, or anybody who likes historical fiction. And one of the cool things about this book is Little House on the Prairie is, it has, what am I trying to say? It has problematic representation with Native Americans and people of color. And Linda Sue Park is an author who read Little House on the Prairie as a child and loved it, but now as an adult and as a person of color, she really struggles with the representation in it. And so Linda Sue Park felt that there was a need for a book like this in children's literature, and so she took that challenge on, and she kind of wrote this as a book that she would have wanted to read as a young girl. So if you like Linda Sue Park, this one is definitely one to read, and if you are a teacher, this is definitely one to pair with Little House on the Prairie or any of your units about Native Americans.
What age range would you recommend that for, Katie?
So I think this is really good for like the 4th, 5th, 6th age range. There isn't really anything, problematic in it in terms of content. I just feel like 3rd graders or younger might not pick up on some of the tension that's happening and some of the things that are more contextual based on what you know about the 1800s.
Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, this is Bright Dead Things, poems by Ada Limon. A friend mentioned a few lines from this poet, and I was inspired to seek her work out. Limon is the author of 5 collected works, and Bright Dead Things is her 4th one. Some of the topics she discusses: moving from New York City to rural Kentucky, losing a dear parent, falling in love. I will read one short poem. This is called Field Bling. Nights when it's warm and no one is watching, I walk to the edge of the road and stare at all the fireflies. I squint and pretend they're hallucinations, bright, made-up waves of the brain. I call them field bling. I call them fancy creepies. It's been a long time since I've wanted to die. It makes me feel like taking off my skin suit and seeing how my light flies all on its own, neon and bouncy like a wannabe star. Just enjoyed all her poems. Really good. I highly recommend this.
That's nice. Okay, so Idioma Alois' book, So You Want to Talk About Race, came out last year and really is a book for this time. The National Review of Books says about it, this book is a much needed and timely. It is more than a primer on racism. It is a comprehensive conversation guide. And that's exactly what I found it. My adult children recommended we do this as a family book discussion. So we all have copies and we have taken it slowly, one chapter at a time. And that is really what I would recommend for this book if you're going to enter into if you have the ability to enter into an extended discussion, because there's so much. Each chapter is only about 14 pages, but she does such a great job of really giving you clarity around a particular issue in each chapter, but then also providing kind of a call to action. So I really love that combination of both instruction and then something that kind of lead to movement on a particular issue, whether it was self-reflective or something you could actually do. For example, on her chapter on white privilege, she sets up the chapter by kind of describing her own privilege, describing privilege in context of her own privilege as a Nigerian American woman. And so that helped us kind of think, okay, so how do we examine what privilege means for us? And that was a great discussion, part of having it be kind of cross-generational, and we really were kind of seeing some different things. So it was great for that kind of conversation. She does provide a conversation guide in the back, but I think that is more for if you're entering into large conversations with groups or in mixed people of color and white conversations. Our conversations are all among white people. So a lot of it is more about her guide is about kind of setting the tone and knowing what you need to, kind of when you need to step back and when you need to listen. But so many things just kind of bubble up out of the page without the guide that I didn't even realize until, partway into the book that there was a guide at the back, and then found that we really didn't need it. So besides the kind of concrete ways she leads you into things, there was another chapter on financial disparities and what that means in our society and how that kind of plays out both systemically and, it's a heavy topic, and so you could get bogged down, but then she, things kind of bubble up out of the page like, well, you could do something as simple as intentionally look for Black-owned businesses to patronize and to spend your money at. And that seems like a simple duh thing, but that kind of came up organically out of our conversation. Like, hey, we could, for birthdays this year, all make a point of doing that. So I really appreciated, a lot of times I'll read a book and, on such a heavy topic like race and think, what can I do? There is a whole lot of what I can do both internally for myself and in our family groups and in the places, the circles that I move. And then also concretely like shopping and how I spend my money. So I would highly recommend this as a book group discussion or a family discussion. I think it works great as a family discussion. It's been really meaningful and if you can do it cross-generational, because I'm telling you, those young kids, like some here on our panel, not kids, sorry, have a completely different experience than someone, 2 or 3 decades away from that can really help inform my generation. So I thought it was great. She's a great follow on Instagram too.
Amy, I have a question for you about this one.
Mm-hmm.
Have you read White Fragility also?
Let's see. No, I did not read White Fragility. I read Waking Up White.
I was going to ask you if you preferred this over White Fragility, so.
Yeah, and White Fragility, is White Fragility a white author? Actually, I have it right here on my shelf.
It is. And that's part of the criticism that it receives, is that it's written by a white person and not a person of color. So it's interesting to, I don't mean to compare the two, but it's interesting to view them in a similar way.
Right. You know, I think it was a panel that I was listening to at Highland Park, and the panelists had mentioned this book, and Robin DiAngelo has another book, not comparing it to So You Want to Talk About Race, but of their book that they liked better. And I don't remember, does anyone else remember what else she wrote?
I don't, but I will add that if you have littles at home, like toddlers and preschoolers or kindergartners, Ibram Kendi just released a picture book called Anti-Racist Baby that is phenomenal, and that one also has discussion points. So if you're looking to really have an intergenerational discussion, I would highly recommend pairing those together, because I think that's going to be a really powerful experience.
Yeah, I think the other one, actually, I found it here, is by Robin DiAngelo, is What Does It Mean to Be White? Developing White Racial Literacy. And I think that was the one that the other panelists felt was better. But one of the things I love about this book is the simplicity of it. In 14 pages, the language is so clean and so accessible. It's really, you know, it is a heavy topic, but there was nothing in this book that I could wrap my brain around. She's just such a good writer, and her clarity is both, you know, she's not trying to simplify it and make it easy for me as a white person. She is definitely firm, and this is what needs to be done, and you need to do it. And I appreciate that firmness and that frankness, but it's also very accessibly written, I found. So.
She's also a great speaker, so if you ever get a chance to listen to her present or a podcast with her or whatever, I highly recommend it, because she is also a very eloquent speaker.
Yeah, and she's all over YouTube, and she has a new book that is just coming out that I believe is on, she's also a pretty strong feminist, and I think that is, I'll look the name up of it, see if I can find it while we're talking.
Okay, I will move us on to our next title then. It is You Had Me At Ola by Alexis Daria. And this is another super fun, kind of steamy romance summer read. And our main character here is Jasmine. And she's been working as an actress in telenovelas for many years, and she gets the chance at her dream job. So she moves to New York to be the lead in a TV series. I think they call it Stream Picks or something, but it's clearly supposed to be Netflix. And she meets her co-star, whose name is Ashton Suarez. And they both kind of have their traumas. She just went through a really public breakup that's been all over the tabloids. And he has a son who lives in Puerto Rico that he's kept secret, and then suddenly people start finding out about it. So they have a romance on screen, and it starts to come up off screen as well. And it's a romance, so you know how that's going to go. Another great thing about this book is that pretty much every single character is Latinx. So if you're looking for something that's fun, light, it's got some steamy moments, if you're a fan of romance, definitely check it out. It's You Had Me At Ola by Alexis Daria.
All right, so this is Go With The Flow, which I believe Amy recommended to me, by Lily Williams and Karen Schneeman. This is a book that I wish I had as a teenage girl, maybe even a little bit before I was a teenage girl, because there are not many stories that are just about or heavily focus on what it's like to get your period for the first time, and kind of how that can change some of your friendship dynamics and your relationships and your views on yourself and all the things that go along with that. But this is really also a friendship story. And it's about 4 girls, Abby, Britt, Christine, and Sasha, and they're fed up. They're fed up because their high school never has enough pads or tampons stocked in the bathroom, and to make matters worse, they have to pay for it. and then when they try to pay for it, the supplies are out. But in typical high school fashion, the football team has gotten new uniforms twice in the last 4 years, and the male administration just does not want to listen to them. So they start something that is described as a menstruation revolution, and they are wanting to bring change to their high school, and they are successful, and they get a large social media following, and that also tests the girls' friendship because it calls attention to some experiences that they had at school, and they maybe use those experiences that aren't theirs as kind of an activist for change. And I also love this story because it's about activism and how being really mad about something might be enough to make change. And that kind of emotion that you have, you should validate that and see what you could do to make yourself and others around you not have to experience that anger or that situation. And I also love this book because the characters are diverse. There is a person of color. There is a girl who presents as lesbian, and she's trying to figure that out. And there's also a girl who has endometriosis, and if you don't know what that is, you're very lucky. But I love that it also covers kind of the full range of what getting your period might look like. And there are also diverse family structures. One of the girls lives with her grandma, and I just cannot speak highly enough about this book, as you can tell. And one of my favorite lines in this book is an insult. And this insult is, "You're a bag of farts." And I just love the tone of this book, and I think it's really approachable. Even though it's about periods and kind of figuring out who you are, it is not scary, it is well written, it's also very approachable. And the other thing that I like about it is that it uses the color red as its primary color. Just overall well done.
I want to second that, Katie. I loved this book a lot. And I think it presents things that really, like any book that covers an issue that maybe doesn't get talked about a lot, kind of helps put you in other people's shoes where, you know, you may understand why someone is always in the nurse in your class because they, you know, can't walk right now because their knees are killing them or whatever. I loved that about this book. It's so accessible for even girls before they get their period. I agree. Like, here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everybody take this book.
I was given the American Girl book that's like, here's your body, here's what you're supposed to, what things happen. I wish I had this instead. The other thing that I like about this is that it really supports female friendships, and they're not out against each other. They're really lifting each other up. And there's a scene in the bathroom where somebody unexpectedly got her period and she doesn't have anything on her, and she's like, "Hey, do you have a tampon?" And the girls are just like, "Here, take one." And it's just that moment of like support that happens in female bathrooms that I love that it's made its way into children's literature. This is shelved in the adult graphic novel collection, but you know, if you have an 8th grade girl, I wouldn't recommend, or I would totally recommend giving this to her. There's nothing questionable about it.
Yeah, I think even a 6th grade girl, if she's right. I don't remember there being anything.
No, it's all totally PG. There's nothing PG-13 about it. So, Tom, this is the book I was wanting you to read when we talked earlier today.
Got it.
Yeah, I think we could have that downstairs.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, this is Show Me a Sign by Anne-Claire Lazat. This just came out recently. This is new juvenile historical fiction. The year is 1805, and teen Mary Lambert lives on Martha's Vineyard. She is deaf, as is her father. Almost everyone living on the island knows sign language because about 25% of the island is deaf. Mary's life is in upheaval. Her brother has died. There are land disputes between the English settlers and the Wampanoag people. A cunning young scientist has come to the island to discover why so many of the residents of Martha's Vineyards are deaf. I learned Martha's Vineyard's sign language was a village sign language that was once widely used on the island from the early 18th century to 1952. It was used by both deaf and hard of hearing people in the community. The author is a deaf librarian and has given book talks on disability and anti-bullying presentations. I found this book really fascinating. I had no idea this part of American history. And so eventually I mentioned that the sign language just died out because as time progressed, people from the island, they moved on. And so the recessive gene that caused this, it just died out. But also the sign language that was predominantly for that community, it also went away. I just found that very interesting. Highly, highly recommend this.
Way
Oh,
through
there
it.
it is.
And I highly recommend it all as well.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Katie's reading it too.
As you said, historical fiction. Is it 4th, 6th, or 6th, 8th? Grade
I would
level?
say 6th. This is categorized as middle school.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't know how to make this one brief, let me tell you. Cloud Atlas. Tom, look, you look so excited. My book group likes to kind of take on a summer challenge where they'll take a book. This one happens that's kind of meaty. This one is 544 pages, and maybe something that we wouldn't necessarily have time to read it at other times. So Cloud Atlas was written in 2004 by David Mitchell. He is a British author. This book, he has another one as well that were both shortlisted for the Man Booker Award in Great Britain. I found this out after the fact, but I thought this was fascinating. While he was born and educated in England, he went to university in England and studied American literature. And I think that, I don't know, I've read a lot of literary fiction and a lot of British stuff, and I just never thought of someone in Britain studying American literature. I don't know. I don't know why that really struck me. It was like, oh, okay. You know, we've studied British American literature, so I guess that makes sense. But anyway, Cloud Atlas is a complicated interweaving of 6 different stories over 6 different time periods with 6 different main characters, but it all kind of ebbs and flows and weaves together. It is not a linear book in any stretch of the imagination. It is, oh gosh, I was trying to think of On the Good Place, where it's like a Jeremy Bearimy. It just goes all over the place. You have no idea where you are. It starts out though with our first voice is 1850s American lawyer David Ewing. He is, or Adam Ewing, sorry. He is on an island in the Pacific somewhere, and he's getting ready to travel back to America. He comes across a variety of different characters, some honorable and some unsavory. And when he is on this boat traveling, he's writing a daily diary, and you're kind of going with him on his journey and what's happening. And then it just ends. It just stops in the middle of the page. And you think, where is this going? As the start of the book, it's a little disorienting. It took a little bit to kind of get into that 1850s sort of language. And that was one of the amazing things about this book. Each little section is a different genre. It's a different kind of voice. So you do have to kind of get into the rhythm of it. And he needed 544 pages to help you do that. I felt like, because it took a little bit. The next story then is in 1931. So we go from the 1850s, and all of a sudden we're plopped down in 1931 with this young composer who has run through his money and some other people's money. And he's just trying to figure out how he's gonna get some cash in his pocket. And so he's kind of come up with this scheme where he's going to go and try to be I think the word is amanuensis, which is sort of like a helper to a famous, brilliant composer who is sort of in his waning years. So he treks through this village and gets to this man's estate and convinces him to take him on and to help him with his composing. And it's during this time period that he composes a sextet in 6 pieces, just like we have with our book, called Cloud Atlas. So that's where the title comes from. And all during this time, his story is told in letters. So he's writing back to his lover, Rufus Sixsmith. And so he's writing all these letters and all the things that happen there. And then we get plopped into 1972, 41 years later. And all of a sudden, the same man is in this story as obviously a much older gentleman, and he's a nuclear scientist. But this is now kind of a thriller piece, this section, and it's about corporate greed and investigative reporting and nuclear science and what is happening and the pursuit of money. I mean, I guess it really all revolves around power and money, and who has it and who wants to keep it. And that becomes really important when you come to the fifth piece later on, or is it the sixth piece? I don't even know now. And for me, the weakest link kind of was the next part, which was set in the 1980s. And I don't know if you remember it at all much, Tom, but that was with Timothy Cavendish, who was kind of the vanity publisher. He gets this manuscript that is this thriller from the 70s, right? Doesn't he get the Louisa Ray story?
Yes.
So that's kind of the tie in there. And, you know, kind of this whodunit, what happened to all these people in this nuclear kind of event. And then we go to something completely different. Would you classify this as a science fiction novel, Tom? Or what would you think? Is it too broad range?
I would say this is fiction, but with sci-fi tones.
Yeah, because I thought at first it was science fiction, but when I started to really think about all the pieces, really only this fifth voice in the sextet is really science fiction.
Yes.
And I don't know if any of you saw the movie Soylent Green. I wondered if this part was sort of an homage to.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm sure. I'd like to think Mitchell saw that movie.
That movie.
Yes.
So look it up. I don't want to spoil too much for you, but this is set in a sort of undetermined future time. They don't give us a specific time. The thing that I thought was fascinating about it is it doesn't seem like it would have to be too distant. You know, it's not hard to imagine this time period. The main character, this is written like a courtroom sort of testimonial, as if she's explaining what happened, but she has been accused of something, Sanmi 451. She is a clone who worked to support the corporate, I think the corpocracy of the where they are. I don't even really, I remember if they say where they are.
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's just some place, but recognizable because you know that this corpocracy, they talk about the red uniforms and the golden arches. So you kind of have a sense of what they're leaning toward without saying any names. But it runs a little bit like a thriller, a little bit very fast paced this part, but a little bit confusing. But a heavy conversation could be had here about dehumanization and what we can allow in order to feed the corporate greed. But we have to keep those corporations humming, and they needed the clones to do that. And then finally, the sixth voice in this sextet is Zachary. I was confused when I first started reading this book because you feel like you're reading a very primitive tribe, but then you realize you're actually possibly back in this Pacific nation where you kind of started all the action with Adam Ewing. Maybe not the same, but it is similar. But you're actually after the fall of the civilized world. So you're able, as this story unravels, to realize what happened in some of the other stories beforehand that led to this point where now we're on what appears to be a primitive island nation, but it is future from the 70s and on, and how that all came about. The stories weave through one another. You see recurring characters and recurring themes, which I thought fascinating. But I just want to read one part so this book was written in 2004. And the very last So it starts with Adam Ewing in the 1850s and ends with his book. And he's talking about what precipitates outcomes. Is it vicious acts or virtuous acts? And then what precipitates acts? And what precipitates the acts is what you believe. And he talks about privilege. You and I, the moneyed, the privileged, the fortunate, won't fare so badly in a society that is greedy. But what of it if our consciences itch? Why undermine the dominance of our race, our gunships, our heritage, and our legacy? Why fight the natural, oh weaselly word, order of things? He says, why? Because of this. One day, one fine day, a purely predatory world shall consume itself. And then he talks a little bit more about that, is doom written in our nature. And then he says, if we believe that humanity may transcend tooth and claw, if we believe diverse races and creeds can share this world as peaceably as the orphans share their candle nut tree, a reference to something that just happened, if we believe leaders must be just, violence muzzled, power accountable, and the riches of the earth and its oceans shared equitably, such a world, a positive world of virtuous acts, will come to pass. I am not deceived. It is the hardest of worlds to make real. Torturous advances won over generations can be lost by a single stroke of a myopic president's pen or a vainglorious general's sword. Reading that at the end of this book, written in 2004, but being in 2020, was like, whoa. As he was writing into the future. So it is a great book for discussion. A lot of timely themes. Not everybody in our group made it through it. It was a hard book. But if you're up for a challenge and you don't mind traveling through different genres, it can give you a lot to talk about if you stick with it. And I know Tom is a big fan of it. So if you have something to add, Tom, please do.
So I've read two other of his books, The Bone Clocks and Slade House. And Mitchell also uses the same formula of just a lot of time progression in between the parts, and it works. At first it might seem disorienting, but I really enjoyed it. And I've never read anything, a convention of 5 stories that end rather abruptly. The 6th story is sort of complete, and then you go back to the other 5 stories to clean them up, and you get the full story. I've never read anything like that before, and it's really good.
Yeah, the members in our group who did finish it really felt like they'd accomplished something.
Yeah.
It was like, this was not easy. And one of them did watch the movie, and she commented that the movie was pretty violent, so just a caveat, but also extremely confusing. She said, I don't know how you would understand it if you hadn't read the book. I had to keep stopping it and then tell my husband, okay, this is what is happening here, because it skipped around so much. You'd have a 30-second clip in one of the 5 sections and then go to a minute clip in the other. So if you're thinking, oh, I'll just watch the movie, I don't think you'll have the same experience.
All right, so this is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. And this is maybe the cutest thing that I've read in the last 2 years thus far. And this is about a world in which there is a female president, and her name is Ellen Claremont. And Ellen Claremont has a couple of children, and one of her children is the first son, whose name is Alex Claremont Diaz. So he's a biracial first son, and his mom is a single lady. And Alex Claremont is responsible in kind of a true millennial fashion as part of his mother's marketing campaign and her social media campaign. And he also has a longtime nemesis. And you can probably guess who his longtime nemesis is. Any guesses? It's Prince Henry of, Britain. And the two get into it at a royal wedding, and it causes quite a kerfuffle. And we're coming right up against presidential re-election time, and there's murmurs and rumors that you know, it could threaten Alex's mother's campaign for re-election, and she's, you know, beloved, and she's just really great at what she does, and you know, everybody likes her, which is kind of amazing. And so damage control kicks in, and they stage a fake friendship to help get President Claremont reelected. And in true fake friendship fashion, you kind of know where that's going to go. They're going to fall in love and get together. And so this is a Alex and Henry are two boys, and they fell in love, and it's magical and beautiful. And this is another book that has great one-liners. So if you like sassy books, you got to check this one out. Alex is the king of sass. And it also felt really true to a millennial relationship. Like, you really feel like Casey McQuiston knows what it's like to be a millennial, and she knows kind of how to write a romance story for that generation, but also in a way that other people will enjoy it. I'm not trying to imply that this is just for millennials, because that's not my intent here at all.
So I'm allowed to read it?
Yes, you definitely are. And you can't help but really root for Alex and Henry to kind of figure things out and get their acts together. And one of the things that I really like about this book is that there are great side characters. Alex has a sister, and there is, you know, somebody else who's very, he's Latin, and he's very flamboyant, and he's just fun, and you just can't help but like him. And the side characters have really great friendships, and I love watching those come together. And this love story is emotional, and it is intense, and I highly recommend this. I did skim some of the political components, mostly because that's not what I was in it for, but I highly enjoy this. Maybe read it after the election, because it's great.
All right, that brings us to our last book of the evening. It is Transcendent Kingdom by Ya Jessie, and you may remember this author. She had a book called Homegoing a few years back, which was also really, really good. And this one has just been working its way up the bestsellers list. It's really wonderful. So it's a story about Gifty, and she is a 20-something getting her PhD in neuroscience. And what she's doing is studying addictive behavior in mice. And she wants to translate that into like why certain humans become addicted and others don't. And she has a personal reason for studying this. So she comes from a family of immigrants from Ghana, and they had moved to Alabama before she was born. And her older brother, Nana, passes away from an overdose when he's a teenager, and he was an opioid addict. So after this happens, Gifty's mother becomes extremely depressed. She won't leave bed for months. It really kind of breaks the family apart. And now about 15 years have passed, and her mother has fallen back into this depression. So she comes to stay with Gifty. And they kind of have to deal with all this grief that they didn't really talk about when it originally happened. And then there's also kind of a religious aspect to the book as well. Gifty was raised in an evangelical Christian church, and she's kind of strayed away from that since then, but she's still thinking a lot about spirituality and the existence of God, and that's all worked into the story as well. There's so many different themes going on. I think it's a great pick for book clubs because it talks about mental illness, addiction, grief, spirituality, all these things. It's really, really well written. It's definitely a tearjerker, so make sure you have some tissues ready. If you were a fan of either of Britt Bennett's books, either The Mothers or Vanishing Half, you might like this one. Or if you liked Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, if you liked any of those, you would probably like this one. It is Transcendent Kingdom by Ya Jessie. And we're going to skip the what are you reading for tonight. So that is all we have. Thank you for presenting this evening. I was writing notes the whole time, and I'm going to pick up a lot of the books that you guys were talking about, so thank you.
I've got a big list too.
Yeah.
Yay.
Like, oh, gotta read that, gotta read that, gotta read that.
Yep.
I'm going to go finish Show Me a Sign.
Hmm.
Wonderful.
Thanks,
all right.
guys.
Good night,
That was
everyone.
great.
All right.
Good night.
Good night.